Most people think vocabulary is learned by memorizing vocabulary lists. Most people think fluency comes from speaking more. Most people think improvement comes from studying harder. But here's what they don't realize. The human brain does not learn language the way many schools teach it. Think about this. When you were a child, nobody handed you a list of 10,000 words. Nobody gave you weekly vocabulary exams. Nobody taught you complicated grammar formulas before you learned to speak. Yet somehow you learned your first language. Why? Because your brain learned through exposure. Your brain learned through patterns. Your brain learned through repetition. Your brain learned through context. Now something interesting happens when people start learning English. They suddenly stop learning naturally. Instead, they begin chasing information. They collect grammar rules. They collect vocabulary lists. They collect study materials. But they rarely spend enough time experiencing the language itself. Imagine someone who wants to become a swimmer. Instead of entering the water, they spend all day reading instructions about swimming. They learn every theory, every technique, every rule, but they never actually swim. Would they become a great swimmer? Of course not. Yet many English learners do exactly this. They study language without living inside the language. And reading is one of the easiest ways to live inside English every day. The truth is, vocabulary is not just about knowing definitions. Vocabulary is about relationships. Every word connects to other words. Every word carries emotion. Every word has context. For example, imagine learning the word challenge. A vocabulary list gives you a definition. But reading gives you something much more powerful. You see how the word behaves. You see how it interacts with other words. You see how it appears in different situations. You see how real people use it. Your brain begins building connections. And those connections create memory. This is why some words stay in your mind forever while others disappear overnight. The words you experience repeatedly become part of your mental world. The words you simply memorize often fade away. Most people never understand this. Language is not built word by word. Language is built pattern by pattern. And reading is one of the richest sources of patterns available. Every sentence teaches structure. Every paragraph teaches flow. Every page teaches expression. Without realizing it, your brain is constantly collecting information. The challenge is that many learners become impatient. They want immediate results. They want fluency next month. They want confidence next week. They want vocabulary tomorrow. But language growth rarely works like that. It's more like planting a tree. At first, nothing seems to happen. Days pass. Weeks pass. The ground looks exactly the same. You start wondering if your efforts matter. Then one day a small green shoot appears. Then another. Then another. Eventually, the tree becomes impossible to ignore. Reading works the same way. For a while, progress feels invisible. Then suddenly you recognize more words. You understand more conversations. You speak more naturally. You write more clearly. And people begin asking you a surprising question. How did your English improve so much? The answer is often simple. You fed your brain good language consistently. And reading was the tool that made it happen. Let's talk about something fascinating. Your brain is changing right now. At this very moment. As you listen. As you think. As you learn. Your brain is constantly adapting. Scientists call this neuroplasticity. The word sounds complicated. The idea is simple. Your brain changes based on what you repeatedly do. Think about a path through a forest. The first time someone walks through the forest, the path is difficult. There are branches. There are obstacles. There is confusion. But if thousands of people walk the same path repeatedly, something happens. The path becomes clearer, wider, easier to travel. Your brain works the same way. Every time you encounter a word, you strengthen a pathway. Every time you read a sentence, you strengthen a pathway. Every time you recognize a pattern, you strengthen a pathway. And over time, those pathways become automatic. This is where reading becomes incredibly powerful. When you read regularly, your brain receives thousands of examples of English. Thousands. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. Your brain starts noticing patterns automatically. You begin predicting words before seeing them. You begin understanding grammar without consciously thinking about grammar. You begin recognizing sentence structures instantly. Now something interesting happens. Confidence begins to grow. Not because someone told you to be confident, but because confidence is often a result of familiarity. Think about driving a car. The first lesson feels stressful. Everything feels difficult. You overthink every movement. But after enough practice, driving becomes natural. Language works similarly. Reading creates familiarity. Familiarity creates comfort. Comfort creates confidence. And confidence changes behavior. This is why strong readers often become strong speakers. Not because reading directly teaches speaking, but because reading fills the brain with language patterns that later appear during conversations. Think about this. Every book is a conversation with a mind. Every article is a conversation with an idea. Every story is a conversation with human experience. And every conversation leaves traces inside your brain. Over time, those traces become knowledge. That knowledge becomes vocabulary. That vocabulary becomes communication. And communication becomes opportunity. Now let's talk about memory. Many learners complain about forgetting words. The truth is, forgetting is normal. Your brain is designed to forget. Imagine remembering every single detail from every day of your life. Your brain would become overwhelmed. So the brain filters information. It keeps what seems important. It removes what seems unimportant. This is why reading is so effective. Reading repeatedly exposes you to important words. When your brain sees the same word again and again, it receives a message. This word matters. This word is useful. Keep this. And slowly the word moves into long-term memory. This process cannot be rushed. But it can be accelerated through consistent exposure. And that is exactly what reading provides. Not pressure. Not stress. Not endless memorization. Exposure. Natural. Repeated. Meaningful exposure. And as those words accumulate, something remarkable begins to happen. Your internal English voice becomes stronger. You start thinking in English more often. You start recognizing phrases instantly. You start expressing ideas more naturally. Little by little. Page by page. Day by day. Your brain becomes an English learning machine. And this is only the beginning. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that English is no longer something you struggle with. Now imagine something else. Imagine looking back and realizing that the thing you spent years searching for was never a secret technique, never a magic app, never a special course. It was a simple habit. A habit so ordinary that most people ignore it. A habit that quietly changes the brain. A habit that slowly builds vocabulary. A habit that improves speaking without speaking. A habit that strengthens writing without writing. A habit that trains the mind every single day. That habit is reading. The truth is, millions of people dream about speaking better English. They buy courses. They download apps. They watch hundreds of videos. They create study plans. They feel excited for a few days. Then motivation disappears. Life becomes busy. The plan gets forgotten. Weeks pass. Months pass. Nothing changes. And slowly a painful thought begins to grow. Maybe English is not for me. Maybe I'm too old. Maybe I'm not talented. Maybe I just can't learn languages. Think about how many opportunities are lost because of that belief. A student stays silent in class. A professional avoids speaking during meetings. Someone skips applying for a better job. Someone avoids making international friends. Someone hides their ideas because they are afraid of making mistakes. Not because they are not intelligent. Not because they lack potential. But because they lack confidence. And confidence often disappears when words disappear. You know the feeling. You know exactly what it feels like when the right word is in your mind somewhere, but you cannot find it. You know what it feels like to understand a sentence but not know how to create one. You know what it feels like to read slowly while others read effortlessly. You know what it feels like to forget words you studied yesterday. It can feel frustrating. It can feel embarrassing. Sometimes it can even feel hopeless. But here's what most people don't realize. The problem is usually not effort. The problem is direction. Many people work hard. Very hard. But they spend their energy on activities that do not give their brain enough exposure to real language. And because of that, progress feels slow. This is where everything changes. Because today we are going to talk about one of the most powerful tools for improving English and vocabulary. Not the fastest trick. Not a shortcut. Not a miracle. Something far more powerful. A system that works with your brain instead of against it. A habit that successful language learners have used for generations. A habit that quietly transforms people from confused learners into confident communicators. And by the end of this video, you won't just understand why reading matters. You'll understand how reading rewires your brain, how it builds vocabulary naturally, how it improves speaking, how it strengthens confidence, and how a few pages a day can slowly change your future. Little by little, day by day, word by word. Because one day, without even realizing it, you'll open a page and discover that the person reading it is no longer the same person who started. And that journey begins now. Try this.
A few years ago, if someone had told me that reading for just 20 minutes a day could completely change the way I think, speak, and communicate, I probably wouldn't have believed them. At that time, I was trying hard to improve my English, but no matter what I did, I kept forgetting new words and making the same mistakes. Little by little, however, I began to realize that progress does not happen overnight. Instead of looking for shortcuts, I started reading articles, short stories, and books whenever I had free time. At first, it was difficult because there were many words that I did not understand, but rather than stopping every few minutes, I focused on understanding the main idea. As a result, reading became more enjoyable and less stressful. The more I read, the more familiar English felt. Not only did I learn new vocabulary, but I also began to notice how native speakers connected ideas, expressed emotions, and shared opinions. For example, whenever I came across an interesting phrase, I wrote it down so that I could use it later in conversations. Over time, my confidence grew, and I found myself speaking more naturally than before. Even though I still make mistakes from time to time, I no longer fear them because I know that every mistake is an opportunity to learn. Looking back, I can honestly say that consistency made the biggest difference. If you keep showing up every day, even when you don't feel motivated, you will eventually see results. The journey may take longer than expected, but as long as you continue moving forward, improvement is not a matter of if, but when.
Useful phrases from the paragraph. A few years ago, if someone had told me, I probably wouldn't have believed them. No matter what I did, little by little, I began to realize, instead of, whenever I had free time, at first, rather than, as a result, the more. Not only but also. For example, over time, from time to time, looking back, I can honestly say, as long as, it is not a matter of if but when. Grammar structures included you learned. Third conditional, if someone had told me, I probably wouldn't have believed them. Past continuous idea, I was trying hard to improve my English. Present perfect, I have free time or I have learned. Comparative structure, the more I read, the more familiar English felt. Not only, but also, not only did I learn new vocabulary, but I also, even though I still make mistakes. As long as you continue moving forward. Relative clause, words that I did not understand. Purpose clause so that I could use it later. Time clause, whenever I came across an interesting phrase. For maximum improvement. Read it silently 3 times. Read it aloud 5 times. Chapter 1. Read for understanding, not perfection. Imagine sitting with an English book. You read the first sentence. Then you find an unfamiliar word. Immediately you stop. You open a dictionary. You search for the meaning. Then you return. A few lines later, another unfamiliar word appears. You stop again. Soon reading feels exhausting. Many learners experience this problem. They believe they must understand every word. But here's what most people don't realize. Perfect understanding is not necessary for learning. In fact, chasing perfection often slows learning. Think about a child reading a story. The child does not understand every word. Yet the child continues reading. The brain naturally fills gaps using context. This is one of the most important reading skills you can develop. Instead of focusing on every unknown word, focus on the overall meaning. Ask yourself, what is happening? What is the main idea? What emotions are being expressed? What message is the writer communicating? Now something interesting happens. Your brain begins learning naturally. Instead of studying isolated words, you experience living language. And living language is easier to remember. Imagine reading a story about a traveler lost in a foreign city. You encounter the word confused. Even if you don't know the exact definition, the situation helps you understand. The character is lost. The character doesn't know where to go. The character feels uncertain. Suddenly the word gains meaning. This meaning is stronger than a dictionary definition because it is connected to a real situation. Over time, thousands of these small experiences accumulate. And vocabulary begins growing naturally. This is where everything changes. Reading stops feeling like a test. Reading starts feeling like discovery. Your daily exercise is simple. Choose material slightly above your current level. Read for 15 to 20 minutes. Focus on understanding the message. Only look up a few important words. Keep moving forward. The common mistake is stopping too often. The solution is trusting the process. Long term, this habit trains your brain to understand English naturally instead of translating every sentence. And that ability becomes one of the foundations of fluency. Chapter 2. The Power of Daily Reading. Imagine two learners. One reads for 3 hours on Saturday and then does nothing for the rest of the week. The other reads 15 minutes every day. Who improves faster? Most people assume the first learner. But the truth is often the second. Because the brain loves consistency. Every time you read, you send a signal to your brain. This language matters. When that signal arrives daily, learning becomes stronger. When it arrives occasionally, the brain pays less attention. Think about watering a plant. A little water every day produces healthier growth than flooding the plant once a week. Language learning works similarly. Daily reading creates daily exposure. Daily exposure creates stronger neural pathways. Stronger pathways create faster recognition. Faster recognition creates confidence. And confidence creates momentum. This is the hidden advantage of reading habits. The goal is not heroic effort. The goal is regular effort. 15 pages. 10 pages. Even 5 pages. Consistency matters more than intensity. Because little by little becomes a lot. And over time, that simple habit begins transforming everything. Chapter 3. Build vocabulary through context, not memorization. Imagine you're reading an interesting story. A young entrepreneur starts a business. The business fails. He feels disappointed. But instead of quitting, he remains determined and continues working. Now imagine you encounter the word determined. You may not know its exact definition. But because of the situation, your brain begins to understand it. The character failed. The character faced difficulty. The character continued anyway. Without opening a dictionary, your mind starts building meaning. This is the power of context. The truth is, context is one of the greatest teachers in the world. Most people think vocabulary growth comes from memorizing long word lists. But here's what they don't realize. Words become memorable when they are connected to emotions, situations, people, and stories. Think about this. Can you remember every definition you studied last month? Probably not. But can you remember a powerful story you read years ago? Most likely yes. Why? Because stories create emotional connections. And emotional connections strengthen memory. Your brain is not a storage machine. It is a meaning machine. It remembers things that feel useful. It remembers things connected to experience. This is why reading naturally expands vocabulary. Every page provides context. Every paragraph provides clues. Every story creates associations. Now something interesting happens. Instead of learning a word once, you start seeing it repeatedly. The same word appears in different situations. Each appearance adds another layer of understanding. Eventually, you don't just know the word. You feel the word. You understand how it behaves. You understand when to use it. Imagine you're talking to a friend. Without thinking, the word suddenly appears in your conversation. Not because you forced yourself to memorize it, but because your brain absorbed it naturally. This is where everything changes. Vocabulary becomes a living tool instead of a list of definitions. Your daily exercise is simple. When you discover a new word, don't immediately focus on memorizing it. First, understand the situation around it. Ask yourself, what is happening? Why is this word being used? What feeling does it create? Then continue reading. Trust the process. The common mistake is trying to memorize every new word. The better approach is understanding and repeated exposure. Over time, your vocabulary grows deeper, stronger, and more natural. And that kind of vocabulary stays with you for years. Chapter 4. Create a daily reading environment. Imagine entering a room filled with English. Books on the table. Articles on your phone. Interesting stories ready to read. English becomes part of your environment. Now imagine the opposite. You want to improve your English, but every day is filled with your native language. Every website, every message, every piece of content. What happens? Improvement becomes much slower. Here's what most people don't realize. Environment often beats motivation. You may feel highly motivated today, but motivation changes. Some days you feel excited. Some days you feel tired. Some days you feel distracted. But when your environment supports your goal, progress continues even when motivation disappears. Think about this. If healthy food is in your kitchen, eating healthy becomes easier. If books are visible around you, reading becomes easier. If English content surrounds you, exposure becomes automatic. This is how successful learners improve faster. They don't rely only on motivation. They design their environment. Your brain constantly adapts to what it sees. If you see English every day, your brain starts treating English as something normal. And familiarity reduces fear. Fear often comes from unfamiliarity. The more familiar English becomes, the more comfortable you feel. Now something interesting happens. Reading stops feeling like studying. It becomes part of daily life. You read while drinking coffee. You read while traveling. You read before sleeping. You read during short breaks. Little moments begin accumulating. And those moments create transformation. Your daily exercise is to create a reading environment. Keep an English book nearby. Follow English blogs. Read English news. Save interesting articles. Make English visible. The common mistake is waiting for the perfect time. The solution is creating opportunities throughout the day. Over time, reading becomes automatic. And when something becomes automatic, growth becomes inevitable. Chapter 5. The Reading Aloud Technique. Imagine reading silently. Now imagine reading the same passage aloud. Something completely different happens. Your eyes see the words. Your brain processes the meaning. Your mouth produces the sounds. Your ears hear the language. Multiple learning systems activate at the same time. This is why reading aloud is so powerful. Most people separate reading and speaking. They treat them as different skills. But here's what they don't realize. Reading aloud creates a bridge between input and output. The words you read begin preparing the words you speak. Think about a musician. A musician doesn't simply study music theory. A musician practices. Again and again. Language works the same way. Reading aloud is practice. You train pronunciation. You train rhythm. You train confidence. You train fluency. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. You may speak slowly. You may make mistakes. You may stumble over difficult words. That is completely normal. Every skilled speaker once sounded uncertain. Every confident communicator once struggled. This is part of the journey. Now something interesting happens after several weeks. Words become easier to pronounce. Sentences flow more smoothly. Your speaking confidence begins increasing. Not because you forced confidence, but because familiarity created confidence. Your brain starts recognizing patterns more quickly, and your mouth begins producing them more naturally. Your daily exercise is simple. Choose one page. Read it aloud for 10 minutes. Focus on clarity. Focus on rhythm. Focus on expression. Do not rush. The common mistake is reading too quickly. The solution is reading naturally. Over time, this habit dramatically improves speaking ability while continuing to build vocabulary. And that combination becomes incredibly powerful. Chapter 6. Keep a vocabulary journal. Imagine discovering a valuable word today. You understand it. You like it. You promise yourself you'll remember it. A week later, it's gone. Many learners experience this frustration. The reason is simple. The brain needs reinforcement. This is where a vocabulary journal becomes powerful. Think about this. When you write something down, you create another layer of memory. Your brain pays more attention. The information feels more important. Now imagine reading a fascinating article. You find 3 useful words. Instead of creating a giant list, you write the word, its meaning, a sentence from the article, and your own sentence. Now something interesting happens. The word becomes personal. It becomes connected to your life. And personal information is easier to remember. Your brain loves relevance. The more relevant a word feels, the stronger the memory becomes. But here's what most people don't realize. A vocabulary journal is not a collection project. It is a usage project. The goal is not collecting thousands of words. The goal is using useful words repeatedly. Quality beats quantity. 10 words used correctly are more valuable than 100 forgotten words. Your daily exercise is simple. Record 3 to 5 useful words each day. Review them regularly. Use them in conversation. Use them in writing. Use them in your thoughts. The common mistake is creating massive vocabulary lists. The solution is focusing on practical words you actually want to use. Over time, your journal becomes a record of your growth. And every page reminds you how far you've come. Chapter 7. Read different types of content. Imagine eating the same meal every day. Eventually, you become bored. Now imagine reading the same type of content forever. The same thing happens. Growth becomes limited. Here's what most people don't realize. Different types of reading develop different parts of your vocabulary. Stories teach emotions. News teaches current events. Biographies teach life lessons. Business articles teach professional language. Science articles teach analytical thinking. Personal development books teach self-growth vocabulary. Every category expands your world. And every expanded world expands your language. Think about this. If you only read children's stories, your vocabulary grows in one direction. If you explore many topics, your vocabulary grows in many directions. This is where everything changes. English stops becoming a subject. It becomes a gateway. A gateway to ideas. A gateway to knowledge. A gateway to opportunities. Now something interesting happens. You begin discovering interests you never knew you had. A book introduces a new perspective. An article sparks curiosity. A biography inspires action. And while learning those ideas, you're also learning English. This creates a powerful advantage. You improve your language while improving your life. Your daily exercise is simple. Each week, read something different. Try a story. Try a news article. Try a biography. Try a self-improvement book. Keep exploring. The common mistake is staying inside a comfort zone forever. The solution is variety. Over time, your vocabulary becomes richer, more flexible, and more useful. And that flexibility helps in every area of communication. Chapter 8. Become the kind of person who reads. Imagine two people. The first person says, I am trying to read. The second person says, I am a reader. The difference may seem small, but psychologically it is enormous. Most people focus on goals, but successful people often focus on identity. Think about this. A person who says, I am trying to exercise behaves differently from someone who says, I am an athlete. A person who says, I am trying to learn English behaves differently from someone who says, I am an English learner. Identity shapes behavior. Behavior shapes habits. Habits shape results. This is one of the most powerful ideas you'll ever learn. Everything starts to change when you stop seeing reading as something you do occasionally, and start seeing it as part of who you are. A reader reads. Not because of motivation. Not because of pressure. Not because of deadlines. A reader reads because reading is part of their identity. Now something interesting happens. Decisions become easier. You don't ask whether you should read today. Readers read. That's what readers do. You don't need endless motivation. You need alignment with your identity. Little by little, your self-image begins changing. You become someone who values learning. Someone who enjoys growth. Someone who expands their vocabulary naturally. Someone who becomes more confident every month. And one day you realize something remarkable. The goal was never just learning English. The goal was becoming a stronger version of yourself. Reading was simply the vehicle. A vehicle carrying you toward greater confidence, greater knowledge, greater communication, greater opportunity. Your daily exercise is simple. Every morning remind yourself, I am a reader. I am improving every day. I am building my future one page at a time. The common mistake is focusing only on results. The solution is focusing on identity, because results come and go. But identity creates lifelong habits, and lifelong habits create extraordinary lives. This is where the transformation truly begins. Not when you finish a book, not when you learn 1,000 words, but when you become the kind of person who never stops learning, the kind of person who keeps turning pages, the kind of person who keeps growing, the kind of person who understands that every page read today is building a better version of tomorrow. And that journey has only just begun.